What's happening, everybody? It is a cloudy day here in June, South Carolina. I am Alex Swire-Clark, emotional intelligence expert, author, and award-winning speaker with part 2 of my series on emotional intelligence questions in the interview process. So this video is designed for folks who are hiring managers, folks who are in HR, who are hiring people on a normal basis and getting you some good emotional intelligence pieces to add to your repertoire in terms of when you're hiring people. Because as we know, we've gone beyond this whole situation of what's your favorite book you've ever read and tell me about yourself. Those questions are still asked in the interview process, but we're also starting to ask more emotional intelligence questions. And I've put on my website and on YouTube part 1 of this series, which is more about the self-awareness piece. And so the second audience that this is involved about and for is those folks who are on the other side of the table, those folks who may be being interviewed. Maybe you're moving up in your career or moving to another company. These would be questions that you need to be mindful of if you're going to be going to that interview process that you may encounter, to be prepared to answer those questions in an effective way. So these are coming from Biz Journal, and I'll put a link in the description in terms of where we're getting these particular questions from. So this is all about relationship management today. And so I'm going to be reading some of these questions off to you and give you kind of the DISC response. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the DISC methodology and of human behavior, DISC is a method that was created by Carl Jung back in 1921 and then by Hippocrates back in the 300, 200 BC area. And so if you're wanting to know more about that, again, I'll put a link in the description below for where you can go back and look at some of the methodology we're talking about between the high D's, I's, S's, and C's. From a relationship management standpoint, we're talking about more than just interpersonal relationships, which is where we were in our last video. This competency focuses on the ability to inspire others, create resonance to a company's mission or vision, challenge the status quo, and bring out differing perspectives in a collaborative fashion. So that's a whole lot of big jargon that means how can we recognize in others, what we're seeing from an emotional intelligence standpoint? How can we work better together collaboratively? So the first question you might hear would be, describe a situation where you had misplaced optimism. How did you proceed? So when we misplace optimism, typically the most optimistic types of personality styles are our outgoing styles. So our high D's and our high I's. Those outgoing people, never met a stranger, life is always great, super enthusiastic, super positive, woo, man, let's go. That's kind of their mindset. And so we typically think that the glass is always half full, no matter what the situation is. Yes, we're hiring this person. They don't have a lot of experience, but I can train them up. Or, yes, we've never done this particular project in a company before, but we can do it. I know we can. I trust my gut. So those folks are going to be optimistic. And so the question asks, where you had misplaced optimism. Well, when you misplace your optimism, you're either trusting in someone or something that you don't necessarily know all the facts around. So for example, if I was going to trust my friend to meet me at the store to swap out golf clubs or what have you, then I would trust that's going to go on because I've got experience and that's happened before, and I've got some kind of basis or consistency in my behavior or his or her behavior to tell me that that's going to happen again. So if we've got that misplaced optimism, maybe we're just saying, I'll trust him to be there. Let's say you're doing a Facebook marketplace thing, and you trust that someone's going to have the product or bring the money that they're supposed to pay for the product. So, but they may not. So that may happen. So think about where you come from. Are you optimistic and outgoing, that type of mentality, or are you on that more reserved side, which typically is more of a pessimistic or a let's wait and see approach, or let's think about this analytically? Second question says, tell me about a time when you, as a leader, and we're all leaders at some point in our organization, have found it necessary to bend the rules. What did you do? Why did you do it? And how did you feel about it? So again, going back to our methodology, our rule benders are more of our outgoing folks. For the high D's and the high I's, they typically are a little bit more of rule benders than the S's and C's. And when it comes to even things like showing up to work or showing up to an event, a high D will show up when they feel it's important to them. A high I might show up an hour late, 2 hours late, next week because they got it wrong on their calendar. You never know with a high I. But those S's and C's, man, they are typically like, rule followers, rule creators, especially on the high C side. So when you're asking a question like this, you might not, if you're interviewing a high C, you're probably not going to get much of of a response of, hey, I broke the rules, because they don't break rules. Now, my wife is a super high C. She makes the rules, she sets the rules, she follows the rules. I mean, rules are there to be followed. And so when you're looking for someone and you're trying to get them to stretch, or maybe you're having them to question, a model that they're going to have to follow, or question a set of guidelines that they need to follow, which one of these would you be more likely to break, and why? That might be another question you could ask. So we're getting into the weeds of who are the rule followers, who are more strict in terms of what they do, versus those folks who are going to be, it's kind of whatever. And that comes back to expectations of ourselves and others. And that's something I talk about in some of my workshops quite a bit. Next question will be, what evidence do you have that you have created a positive climate or culture at your current employer? What evidence do you have that you have created a positive climate or culture at your current employer? Now, again, from a priority standpoint, this is super huge for an I and an S. Those people-oriented side, the right-hand side of the graph, they are all about culture. They're all about being part of a family and fit, and it's about that emotions and feelings and friendships and colleagues and being just together and having a good time when you're at work. The D's and C's, not so much, because those are task-oriented folks. So they're there to work. They're there to get a job done, especially for those C's who are reserved and task-oriented. I mean, they might as well just come into work, headphones on, and they're just typing. Hey, Susie, you want to go to lunch? I'm good. I'm fine. And they're eating a sandwich while they're working. So their focus for the C's and D's is on the execution side of things, the getting things done. So for the I's and S's, if you ask them that question, what evidence do you have that you created a positive climate? Oh, they'll be able to tell you all kinds of stories, and the eyes will be very animated. Oh man, this one time I set up a waste basketball tournament, and it was great. We were playing from all around the office, and accounting actually was getting along with sales, and it was great. And the S's will kind of tell some of those stories, but they won't be quite as animated, where they did some connection things. Maybe it was after work, and they were getting some, we're playing board games together, or whatever it happens to be. But for the C's, it's going to be challenging for them to answer this question. So if you're a high C watching this right now, it may be a challenge for you, because again, culture for you, it's not that big a deal. I mean, you're there to work. It's not about watching The Voice or, what did you do last night, or hey, did you watch the ball game? What did you think? It's about coming in, getting your stuff done, and doing it in an orderly way. Same for the D's. I mean, they're going to show up, pound through, and then when they leave, they leave. So culture is not necessarily a big thing for them. So be on the lookout for that kind of question. On an average day, your next question, on an average day, is your main focus on results and tasks, or people and emotions? And so that speaks back to the question we just asked a minute ago. If you live on that right-hand side of the graph, the I's and the S's, you're going to be all about the people side of things. The D's and the C's living on the task side of things. And so one of those may be more important to your employer than another. And so you just have to think about, where am I going into in terms of the work atmosphere, and what are they looking for? Am I going to go work for engineers? If it's working for engineers, it's pretty much going to be mostly task-oriented. If I'm going to be working in customer service, well, that's going to be more people-focused. And so kind of know where you're going and know where you live from your emotional standpoint. And if you haven't gotten an assessment yet, then that's something you want to do. And I'll put a link in the description below, especially if you're watching this on YouTube later, about where you can go and take an assessment. So just be mindful of where you are and what the employer's looking for, so that you can better address this question. And then the final one we'll look at today is, describe the most difficult boss you've had. How did you find common ground? Tell me about something you learned from that boss, and how has that knowledge furthered your career? Well, there's a lot to unpack in there, obviously. So the first part of that is, describe the most difficult boss that you've had. And so typically, people feel challenged from people in opposite quadrants from them. So if you're a high D and you have a high S boss, that's going to be a challenge for you, and vice versa. And then, of course, if you're a high C with a high I boss, that's going to be a conflict for yours, or a challenge for you. And let me tell you why. So when we're talking about diagonal quadrants, those opposites from us, we have different priorities. So if I'm a high D and I'm working for a high S, the high S is going to be focused on empathy and taking care of their people. Whereas you as a high D are about execution. Let's go, let's move fast, let's pivot, let's go. We're going to miss this opportunity over here. Come on, let's move. And the S is going to be like, no. We've got to make sure that we're all together before we move forward on this idea or this concept. And so for you, that's going to be challenging. And of course, vice versa is the same. If you're a high S working for a high D, they're going to be direct, demanding, in your face. It's all about execution. It's all about bottom line. Let's go. Get your stuff done. Get it done. And your S is like, well, dude, just hang on a second. I mean, my dog died. Get another dog. That's not that simple. So, and the I's and C's work the same way. The I's are very flexible. C's very rigid. C's are about the facts. I's are about the fun. So there's going to be some natural kind of headbutting there from how we do what we do and the priorities that we have in terms of what we do on a daily basis. So that's the first part of that question. And tell me something you learn from that boss. So even if you're a high S and you're working with a high D, you can appreciate the positive things that they do. And they're really bottom line oriented. They execute very, very well. Those high Ds are driven. They don't take no for an answer. They go and they go and they go. And if you're working for a high S, the opposite is true. They deeply care about their people. They're fiercely loyal. The folks that work for them stay at that company forever because they take care of them. They support them. They show them appreciation and the kinds of things that they need to do from a culture fit standpoint to keep them on board, for long periods of time. And the I's and C's work the same way. So if we're not intentionally looking, though, we're going to miss those things. If we just think to ourselves, they're not like me, therefore they're not right, then that's where we have a problem. Just because someone's not like you doesn't mean that they're not right, or doesn't mean that they don't have good qualities. I think that's where we struggle as a society today, because we have the different backgrounds and maybe different religious beliefs or whatever else, and because someone else is different, that makes them wrong. And so, again, it's about, when we're talking about this emotional intelligence piece, we need to have that self-awareness first to then understand others, to then be able to adapt our emotional intelligence and adapt to our behavior to meet others where they are. And if we're doing that, then we're going to get a lot farther than just, I'm right, you're wrong, bam, bam, bam. We have this headbutting going on. And how has that knowledge furthered your career? Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But that's the question you're going to get as this airplane flies over. Whee! That's the question you're going to get. And so you're going to have to be, ready to answer that type of question. What has it done? Has it caused you to maybe pick up your pace a little more if you're on the reserve side? If you're on the outgoing side, maybe it's to calm down when you're speaking. Maybe it's just a little less adamant about every single point that you're trying to make. So, what have you learned from those situations? So hopefully these questions have given you something to think about, if nothing else, and prepared you, if you are in HR, to be able to ask better questions to kind of see where the emotional intelligence pulse is of the person you're interviewing, or if you're on the other side of the table and you are interviewing for a job, thinking about things that, well, I know my qualifications, I know my skill set, I know my educational background, I know my experience, but I haven't really thought about these things very much in terms of how am I going to fit within the culture of a company? Because as we move forward into this modernization of careers and we're getting to these hybrid formats, some people are going back to work, manufacturing and things like that. And some people are going to stay in this remote environment or have some kind of hybrid environment. And so culture there is going to be super important, because if you don't fit and you're in a remote setting, how's that going to affect you in terms of your daily work? For an I like me, super challenging. Like for me, having to talk to this little dot all the time, that can be a struggle, because I have to project so much energy because I can't really visualize you, on the other side of the camera. Now I see someone else is watching right now, so that makes me feel good. I'm like, yes, let's go. Somebody's watching. Whoa, we're getting something from this content. But if I had a human being like right on the other side of this camera and we're having a conversation, it's a much different dynamic. And so for me as an I, speaking to a camera all day, it's not going to be as fulfilling, and therefore I'm not going to get that better culture fit versus someone who might be a high C, who wants to work independently anyway, who doesn't need as much human interaction, who's not fueled by that, who's not gaining energy from that on a daily basis. And so it just all goes back to understanding yourself and others and being able to adapt and know what you're hiring for. So if you are the person that's doing the hiring right now, then you need to be making sure, hey, do I have a job description in place that makes sense? Are they doing the things that we think that they're doing? And then am I using tools out there from an emotional intelligence standpoint where I'm saying, okay, this is the best person in this role because they're getting passionate, they're getting energy from their activities on a daily basis. So without some type of hiring assessments or job matching, job benchmarking, then we're really not knowing if we're putting people in the right seat on the bus. Thank you, Jim Collins. So we can get a great person, but if they're not getting energy from a role, they're going to leave tired every day. They're going to be complaining. That's going to generate gossip in a very toxic environment. So all these things go back into the whole wheel of the spectrum of what we're talking about in terms of emotional intelligence, how we're actually applying it. So use some job matching and job benchmarking tools. You can reach out to me. I've got those tools. They're super inexpensive, but they're so helpful in that hiring process. And again, if you're on the other side of the table and you're the person being interviewed, be mindful of these things. Kind of prepare for these things. Do some walkthroughs, do some role playing to kind of get yourself in the mindset of it's not just about what I can do for the company, it's about how I fit into the company and what I can do from adding to the culture versus taking away from that culture. So hopefully these tips are helpful to you. Again, I'm over at youtube.com/Alex Swire-Clark. Would love to see you over there. Like and subscribe to any videos that you see there. We appreciate you subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.